You're listening to the Insight to Action podcast. My name is Donna Jones. My work involves helping companies transform using pretty novel and fun ways from one state to another. And of course, on that topic with me today is Dennis Wittrock, who has been doing a lot of work in the holacracy field, particularly with and also with the integral community in Europe. So Dennis is based in Germany. He's a certified holacracy coach in Germany. So we're going to have a conversation today about what it's like implementing holacracy in companies, because a lot of companies are looking for new self-management solutions. We did do a conversation on Zappos in my previous podcast, and also we did another conversation with Tom Thomason on encode.org, which is the company that Dennis is a part of. So Dennis, welcome to the program. Let's have some fun chatting about what you're experiencing with the implementation of holacracy.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, let's start with the question around what makes companies choose holacracy over other things, because there are a number of other options. There's like the free-form model that Laurent Ledoux and I talked about the last time, where you just go in and use principled decision making. You've got liquid organizations that Cocoon Projects works with. There's so many different options. What makes them decide this is the one that I'm going to have a shot at implementing and customizing?
I'm not sure I can speak for all these organizations that implement holacracy, but currently the client I'm working with, they were looking for a model to. They were clear that they wanted to self-organize, and that this was the way ahead in the future, and the future of work for them. They had some big company gathering where they kind of figured out kind of the principles of how they want to work in the future and what it's going to be like. And self-management or self-organization was a big one for them. They said, yeah, we're going to do that. Oh, okay, but how? Like, what exactly, how do we do that? It's like, yeah, it's good to have a vision and a goal, but eventually you need to take some steps toward it. And what they found is, as you said, there's different models out there. And they were looking for something that would be robust and well described. Holacracy just fit that bill, because holacracy, as you may know, is essentially a practice based on a rule set, which is explicit, and this rule set is the Holacracy Constitution. So whenever you're uncertain, is what we're doing really the thing? Is it holacracy? Are we playing by the rules of the Constitution or not? And verify. Or many companies experiment with their own stuff, and then they come up with something which is more or less documented. But holacracy is pretty strong on that one, on that aspect. It's well documented, and there's some couple hundred companies that are also collecting experience with holacracy. So it's not that you're alone and you're the only one doing it. You could also then compare and exchange with others and learn from them, and vice versa. So I think that's what made my client decide, yeah, let's go for holacracy. This is the only option we see that's feasible for a company of our size. Also, it's also a size thing. Peopleport, the client I'm working with, is actually they just recently bought another company. So previously they were like around 1,000 people, but now they're around 1,300 people. They needed something that would scale up and was robust and well defined. Holacracy fits that bill.
Tick those boxes. My lens is often decision making and leadership, because those are the places where you pivot. You make big leaps of. How did they actually communicate the decision? How did they, get it started so that employees knew what they were getting into? And did they have the kind of attrition rate that Zappos experienced when they first announced they were going to go ahead? I think they lost something like 14% right away. They just said, because they were given that option, if this doesn't work, if you don't like the idea of doing this structured process, then you can bail. And of course, quite a few did. What happened in the terms of the communication and how employees got engaged in the process?
The idea to move forward with self-management and all those principles associated with it. That came up like 2 years ago, and they were experimenting with it before I was involved with them. My colleague there, a coach colleague, he had started the whole process of decision making or kind of figuring out what to choose and all that before I entered the picture. So in September, he asked me to join and support him as an external freelance coach. It was kind of a gift for me. And all the difficult part, convincing the board, because Holacracy is, you cannot take a bottom-up approach of implementing it. It's not like workers get together and decide, hey, let's do this differently. But you really have to get the buy-in from the board, and that had already happened. So there was no resistance in that sense. That had to be worked through. It was already a done deal. I guess the question is, what led them to believe that self-management or self-organization is the path? I think that's the question here, because once they figured that out, they decided, okay, now we have to find a practical way to do this, which is why they landed with Holacracy. But I guess the real question is why self-management? And I can only speculate because I actually don't know. My sense is, as a fintech software-based, heavily software-based company there, that they already have the agile kind of mindset and working with frameworks like Scrum and Kanban and all that stuff. So that was already kind of in the cultural vicinity of their thinking, and the next step to Holacracy isn't the big one if you're already working like that.
That's interesting because, we have a lot of conversations around Agile. I was speaking at the Mob Programming Conference down in Boston, and just, looking at what is when you start implementing anything new, what is the mindset that keeps things open and receptive? Like how does that come about, really, from moving from a more traditional framework where everybody's trying to control everybody else to something where everybody's working with everybody else? It's a considerable shift. So how did you get started? When you came in, what happened? Like what role did you find yourself playing? What were people struggling with? Were they struggling at all? Because there's this illusion that Holacracy it's flat and it's all mush.
Yeah, right. Okay, there's common confusions about Holacracy, but so far what people were most struggling with, of course, was first of all understanding how is this new game to be played? What's this new language that we're supposed to speak? And for us, the question was, how can we make it more of something that's experientially verifiable versus something that we just lecture about and kind of impose on them and create resistance around. When I came into the picture, they had already started setting up the top circle of the company, running different meetings, running the meeting processes that Holacracy defines, which are constitutionally required. One is the operational and one is the governance, the technical and the governance meeting processes. The one is working within the organization, the other is working on the organization, on the structures, roles, authorities. So it's that's kind of some of the basics of Holacracy for those listeners who may not have heard about it. So they had already started creating initial governance, as we call it, setting up some roles, meaning like translating the recurring activities and functions of the organization at the highest level into roles. And roles are roles of the organization. It means functions that are needed to express the purpose of the organization. So they started with that, and from there, actually, I joined, and we started rolling it out, let's say, downwards from there, tackling the layers below that, and setting up the circles below the board circle, basically, with the same process, where we would go in and first of all give them a taster workshop, ideally, where possible, having them experience the new meeting methods and have them give them the opportunity to ask questions and voice concerns and all that. And later taking the team lead, the former team lead, and simply say, okay, yeah, you are the lead link of the circle, so that's a important role in Holacracy, making them lead link, and say, okay, now your job is to structure the work of the circle. And actually, what we try to do is just map the existing work into roles and accountabilities, recurring activities, and then create something like an initial circle structure or governance of that circle. And once that's set up, you start playing the game. You just assume that the current structure is the requisite structure. Hint, it's not. And the difference you feel or the difference between those structures, between the requisite and the currently existing one, is being felt in tensions. So people feel tensions, say, hey, this is not working, or I got stuck here, or there's a role missing, or there's an accountability missing. And that's what you take as those tensions you take to power the organization and the organizational change. So you funnel those tensions through the processes, and it spits out a more requisite structure in the end. So that's how it works. Once we got them started, we in parallel we started training the people in the facilitation role. There's another role that's important in Holacracy. It's the facilitator, who's holding to the rules of the game throughout the meetings. And the meetings are central in Holacracy. There's a lot that happens outside of meetings. just want to make sure to mention that, because many people just see the meeting processes and think, oh, I have to bring everything to the meeting and everything's meeting centered. It's not. Actually, meetings are fallbacks. People go there only if they need to synchronize or solve tensions that they cannot solve otherwise. Because, of course, once you defined all the authority and distributed it to the people, that means the people who are authorized to just act and decide don't have to ask anybody for anything. They just can go and do their work. And that's of course the benefit of self-organization. No need to CC everybody or ask for consent or ask the boss to give permission or something. Everything's allowed, which is not explicitly forbidden or against the rule of the Constitution or a self-given rule that the organization gave itself to protect itself. So apart from that, you're free to do anything. So that liberates some free energy and creativity in people, empowers them. Yeah, so we set up these facilitation trainings and trained them to process and, challenge them with all kinds of situations so that they would be able to get enough safety to start holding the process and making their own experiences, because Holacracy is a practice. And you have to get people who are facilitating the process to a level where they feel safe enough to try. And once they have that level, they can ask for help. They can, you can give them resources, or they can ask the coaches. They can get help. But you don't want them to fail. You don't want them to stand in front of the group and say, I don't know. Oh, by the way, this process sucks or something. That's to be avoided. So you got to give them some proper training, and then we're in a phase where there's done like 5 internal trainings so far, and there's many dozens of trained facilitators, and they can start also to help each other out once ideally there's more than one trained facilitator in each circle. So they can kind of self-correct also, and others are starting to learn the rules of the game too. In the end, we hope to set up a self-reinforcing structure that kind of just tugs along, right? We're now looking into other aspects, namely also inspired by the work with ENCODE. The question was always, okay, how can we also cover the interior dimension that Holacracy is just leaves undefined, like how do you deal with personal tensions? Because Holacracy introduces the differentiation of role and soul, which means all your tensions that are role related are you have a space for them to process, and all the not role related tensions, mainly personal or interpersonal tensions, there's no defined space for them to process them. So you better get those forums or ways of processing those in place, which is what we're looking at next. Also providing trained coaches, personality coaches, getting that in place. And we'll get a training from my colleague at Encode, Christiane Schöller, who developed the language of spaces, which is an interesting tool or framework that helps differentiate what kind of tension is it, or is it organizational, is it interpersonal, is it personal, or is it parts of these, and where do I address parts of each part appropriately? And that takes, of course, time to learn. But so yeah, it's a lot of change for sure for people. So far, the resistance was really low, acceptance was pretty high. There is, at least in the major part of the organization, so you must understand that there's one big holding company, which is Hypoport AG, which is listed in the German stock market, and then there's like 16 subsidiary companies all under that roof. And so they have 4 main business units. One is a credit platform, then they serve private clients, then they serve institutional clients, and they also are just building an insurance platform. So, and they're acquiring different smaller software companies and merging them and so on. So there's a lot going on, a lot of moving parts. The part I was working on was just one of the 16 units, the biggest one, bigger one. And then there's the mergers. They're trying to build this insurance platform where you can compare insurance, helps customers compare insurances and gives them advice on which to select and so on. A lot of that is software supported. They bought a lot of companies that do that, and of course there's diverging cultures, and that's going to be the more complex part. I've seen some people, or heard some tensions from those. It's going to be interesting to see how to align both at the same. So first of all, it's a new framework for those companies to work under. It's holacracy and no longer top-down management. Then they're thrown into one bucket with 5 other companies that were their competitors before. And they have old clients, and they're supposed to develop a new platform together and share resources and synergize and all that. So yeah, it's gonna be complex, and my hope is, and their hope is also too, that holacracy can be a common language that could help process a lot of these tensions. But for sure, there's going to be some cultural things too, and some maybe personal tensions arising.
That would make complete sense. I mean, I framed this section. That's why I wanted to have the conversation with you today for my listeners, because I call it the messy middle. We've got the old and we've got the new, and in between is that messy transformational part that has all sorts of and I love the word tensions. I mean, James Priest of Sociocracy 3.0 talks about tensions. I was in Stockholm in 2015, and we did a full workshop in CRISP on S3 and the languaging and the processes. And I love the word tension because my own work has involved redirecting conflict, things where instead of actually developing processes to work it through, they just watched it get worse and worse and worse and worse. And then by that time, you're actually having to reconstruct, and it's much more difficult, but doable, but more difficult. So it's always nice to know. It's nice and refreshing when words like tensions allow you to consciously and intentionally tackle what's working underneath the surface and impacting people's relationships with themselves, but also in terms of how's my power being used? How do I see myself? What's my identity in this environment? Who am I? And all these kinds of personal questions. And then, of course, the ones that go with relationship. How can we work together, and is there a leader, and what does leadership mean here, and how do I lead without authority? And so these are the persnickety, more challenging questions, I think, that come from moving from a highly structured, well, it's an environment where you're not responsible. The boss is responsible to
Right.
one where you're completely responsible.
Well, it's more structured. Even one could argue there's more structure than in conventional organizations. Things are much more explicit, and you cannot hide behind the manager effectively. So you are supposed to lead your role. It's expected that you process tensions on behalf of your role, and that you also individually, your individual self-organization, that you get your act together. So you need to practice some form of getting things done, something that helps you give transparency into current projects and actions you're tracking, and at any point in time, essentially, because otherwise there's no conscious choice making in pulling work from the queue. Otherwise, you just blindly working in a way. So you need establish some conscious workflows. I think people will learn to appreciate that, even if they are skeptical now at the moment, because actually, it brings more clarity, brings more agility, you learn a certain discipline for yourself, which also might benefit your private life. You get role clarity, you really learn to work on a peer-to-peer basis where everyone is leading their roles and everybody's following the lead of the other roles. Ideally, in the end, there's a lot that's being reframed, which is at first is uncomfortable, understandably, because we just would like things to continue the way they were.
But the potential for growth, though, is huge. So, I mean, that is the big door. You're moving from an environment where your growth is being defined to an environment where your growth is unlimited. It really just is, it's up to you to decide how much you want to challenge yourself, how you want to use that zone between comfort and the familiar, the unfamiliar, the comfortable and the fresh and the novel.
Yeah, I think Holacracy is a unique way of balancing order and chaos. You could think, because that's a big polarity. So if you have a very top-down structured organization, there's a high degree of order in a sense. You have to ask for permission for everything. So it's like, but that tends towards the negative pole of order, which is rigidity, and it gets boring and innovation stales and so on. If you now move into the anarchistic direction, say, okay, to hell with all hierarchy, and we throw out all structure and we just work wild and free. Well, that's not helping really, because that just leads to chaos, and chaos. Yeah, everything's so new and so unpredictable that it's just overwhelming, and you don't have a good structure to hold it. Human beings and beings in general don't like that. So the question is, how do you balance those two? And Holacracy allows you both to be highly structured in a sense of we know exactly which role is accountable and where the limits of authority are, who owns which domain of work, and at the same time everything is adaptable, and you really steer your work dynamically. You can really respond intelligently to stimuli from the environment. The organization can wake up in a way, have more feedback loops with the outer world and other systems surrounding it. It's a weird mix. It's highly superstructured. At the same time, it's a really highly variable. So whatever you throw in, it gets processed in some ways. You can rely on that. That's great, because that gives you order, that gives you some structure. At the same time, you can throw anything at it, and it'll pop out an answer. It's magic in a way. So
Earlier you talked about GTD, getting things done. I took the abbreviation out. Tell us more.
So GTD is shorthand for getting things done. It's a methodology by David Allen, wrote a popular book. I can recommend it to anybody. It helps you to set up, if you're so inclined, to set up a system of dynamic workflow. So basically, it helps you to self-organize your own life, essentially. So because people, if you look at it, people have some tools for self-organization, like, oh yeah, I have a calendar, of course. That's kind of obvious. Everybody needs a calendar. I have a to-do list somehow. I write up. I can't hold all these ideas in my mind and or all these things I want to do. I can remember all of them. So it makes sense to do it, make a to-do list. But that's about kind of the level people kind of operate at. David Allen kind of tweaks it and expands on it and helps you to actually externalize all the things you don't need to hold in your mind, your brain, so as to free you up and free up your creative potential to actually go and create stuff, because your mental RAM is not clogged with all that other stuff. So essentially it's also a methodology to help you process stuff dynamically. You throw stuff at it, and then you process this in a different way, in a certain way, like just like Holacracy meeting process. You can throw in anything, you process it into clarity, and you don't actually do the work, but you define the work. That's the kind of the gift. So you get front end clarity of some email comes into your inbox. You become your own executive, make an executive decision on it. Like, okay, what is this? Is it a project? Is it an action? Do I need to put it into reference? Is it trash? So that gives you a lot of clarity and unburdens your mind. So I can just recommend, go get that book, read it. You won't regret it. Getting Things Done from David Allen.
Okay, excellent.
Basically, it's embedded implicitly in the Holacracy Constitution and in the meeting processes, so that the style they deal with technical operations is directly inspired from that. And it's no wonder that the David Allen Company, they adopted Holacracy to run their operations and run their business. So yeah, that's an interesting one.
Yeah, exactly. Now you've got the Integral Conference coming up. Can you give us a quick note on that and anything else you'd like to add?
The Integral European Conference in Hungary, close to Budapest. It's an international gathering of hundreds of integralists from all over the world who gather biannually just to present to each other what's new in their field. So the integral approach, mainly inspired by Ken Wilber, but also a lot of other authors and philosophers and writers refer to it. Well, it's a view of everything. It's a lens that helps you see wholeness in what others may see as disparate or as fragmented patterns. There's a lot of fields that are being reformulated: business, spirituality, economics, education, all kinds of applications of this theory of everything, as we can call it. And those people who are interested in that are gathering there in the hundreds. I used to co-direct that event, created it with my colleague in Hungary, Ben Saganti, and it's usually a very fun event to hang out. There's concerts and all kinds of stuff, so it's really great. And check it out, integraleuropeanconference.com if you're interested. You can meet me there and ask me about Holacracy.
Okay, thank you, Dennis. Any particular place you'd like to send people for more information?
I will send you my personal link in the show notes. The page is in German, if you don't mind. And if you're interested in the work of encode.org, which is kind of the company that I'm working for, which looks at kind of the broader patterns of self-organization that are still unaddressed. They have been catalyzed by Holacracy, but that are unaddressed as social, financial, and legal contexts that are still requiring some upgrade too, not just the work which Holacracy upgraded, but also the other structures around it. if you're interested in that, check out encode.org. Hope to meet you maybe at the Integral European Conference or send me an email. Thanks so much for this conversation.
Thanks very much, Dennis, for being on the program. I'm finding more and more companies are exploring, whether they're at the startup stage or in the middle of it, alternative ways of governing themselves. And I think you'll find when, maybe Holacracy is a bit too stiff for you because it's extremely explicit, extremely structured, but there's other options available. As I'm listening to this interview, back over this interview for about the third time now, I'm realizing that there are some threads that tie them all together. Structurally, that is, that make them all hang together. It doesn't matter whether it's a customized governance model that people made up, like fractal evolution, the fractal model that came out of MapBlack Systems, which is on my other podcast. And I'll be putting a playlist together, by the way, to make it easier for you, and also putting a little bit of a book of the transcripts together as well. Point is that there are threads that come together. So I hope you enjoyed the program. Please share, spread the word. I'd super appreciate it. I know how to do content. I'm not as good at marketing, and so I definitely need listeners' help for that. And I want to thank you very much for joining me today. You'll find me on Twitter at EPDAWNA_Jones. You'll find me on LinkedIn. And of course, you'll find me speaking and doing workshops on the advanced skills, the highly advanced skills of working as a, take your whole self to work as a leader, but as one that's very comfortable with complexity, very comfortable with uncertainty and ambiguity. So thanks again. Websites from insight to action.com. Look forward to meeting you in 2 more weeks.